The electricity industry was one sector to report an emissions reduction, cutting almost 6 million tonnes or 3.1%. Hazelwood, Australia's most emissions-intensive coal-fired power plant, closed last March. Australia's emissions are clearly going in the opposite direction from what is needed to meet the Abbott-Turnbull government's Paris climate pledge, said Bill Hare, Director of Climate Analytics. To get to 2030, you need to be reducing emissions about 1.5% a year. Removing trees along the Newell Highway in the state's far north. Photo, Nick Moore. Challenges. One challenge is government efforts are being curtailed. Outlays for climate action are due to shrink from $3 billion in 2017-18 to $1.25 billion by 2021-22, according to the 2018 budget released last week. Questions, too, remain about the treatment of emissions from land use changes and forestry, a sector that continues to be counted at the federal level as a carbon sink. Last year, this category was reported as absorbing a net 22.7 million tons of CO2 equivalent, little changed from a year earlier. Loading that outcome, though, came despite as much as a five-fold increase in land clearing in Queensland after Liberal Nationals Premier Campbell Newman loosened restrictions on native vegetation removal in late 2013. In the most recent Queensland figures for 2015-16, the biggest land clearing state was bulldozing at the rate of some 10 square kilometres a day. The 395,000 hectares cleared that year contributed 45 million tonnes of emissions, the Palaszczuk Labour government said last October. The result is a glaring inconsistency between federal and state land use emissions figures, said Martin Taylor, a conservation scientist with WWF Australia. It puts a question mark over carbon accounting that we shouldn't have. One issue is how to count forest change. Federal government uses grid analysis that doesn't treat land as being cleared if the forest canopy remains above 20%, according to Glenn Walker, a campaigner for the Wilderness Society. By contrast, the Queensland Statewide Land Cover and Trees Study, SLATS, is more thoroughly ground-proofed with a team of 8 staff, and likely more accurate, he said. Fairfax Media sought comment from Josh Frydenberg, the Environment and Energy Minister. Each year, we update land clearing estimates based on latest satellite data, a spokesperson for the Federal Environment Department told Fairfax Media last October. Where applicable, we also revise estimates to reflect improvements in remote sensing and estimation methods. Mark Butler, Labour's climate spokesman, said the government's land use emissions data have for some time included seemingly inexplicable reductions in the land sector emissions, and this is repeated in this last data release. It is crucially important that people have faith in government emission accounts, but the more I talk to the experts, the more questions are raised about the accuracy of the government's land clearing data. Adam Band, the Greens climate change spokesman, said the party would use Senate estimates to find out why these unexpected figures are now cropping up in land use and forestry. The government appears to now be counting pollution in the land clearing and forestry sector differently, in ways that make it appear as if they're cutting emissions, he said. Emissions rise. National emissions in the last quarter of 2017 accelerated 0.8% to 133.7 million tonnes, or about 2.5% more than the equivalent quarter in 2013, just as the Abbott government came to power, according to the Australian Conservation Foundation. Since the coalition repealed the carbon prices at the end of June 2014, emissions have increased 3.6%, reversing a fall of more than 11% during the Rudd-Gillard Labour governments, ACF said. Trajectory of rising emissions makes the 2030 target of 435 to 441 million tonnes by that year more difficult to reach, Garvin McFadden, ACF's climate change program manager, said. We need a comprehensive national climate change plan that will rapidly cut pollution across our society and ensures Australia plays its fair role in halting global warming and ensuring we maintain our safe climate, he said.